It's more important now than ever to know where your seafood comes from. And the smartest thing that we can do is to find out where your fish comes from and to demand US caught fish and US caught seafood. The United States has the highest level of enforcement in order to bring us seafood in the best way that we know how to take from the ocean and get to our plates.
Us as fishermen, our job and our desire is to educate the consumer. And the more we can educate them, the more they realize and the more they know what they're purchasing and why they're purchasing it. That they're not just purchasing a product, they're purchasing our overall sustainability and healthier fisheries for them and for the oceans as well.
The commercial fishermen in the United States, they work a lot with different science groups and organizations to just keep an eye on stocks and preserve our fisheries so my kids and my grandkids will be able to keep doing this.
Those foreign boats are selling to our markets at a cheaper price. And so we're trying to go by all the rules and get a certain price, and we're getting less.
I think when people try to define sustainability in fisheries, typically what's thought of is sustainable populations or sustainable harvest. Because we're using these fisheries for food, we also need to think about sustainable behavior. Personally, I don't think that any kind of waste of a natural resource is sustainable behavior, and that's a part of the problem.
Another part of educating the consumer will be educating the consumer about some of the secondary cuts. It gives access to other people who might not be able to afford what will be known as prime cuts of fish. If they know how delicious those other parts are, they're going to realize that those collars are great on the barbecue. The racks and the bones are also great on the barbecue. They can be scraped with a spoon to make a tuna tartare or a ceviche or a poke. There's lots of great things we can do with those cuts, and the more the consumer knows that, the more value they're seeing to what they're purchasing.
This recipe is going to use some of the most underutilized cuts from head, frame, all the way to tail. We're gonna be preparing a dish called marmitaco, which is traditional to northern Spain. It is essentially a fish stew. We started with 3 secondary cuts of the big eye tuna, which would typically get thrown in the trash. And once we cooked it down and fortified it with wonderful ingredients, we scraped off all the meat possible, and we ended up with a meal that could feed a whole family. It's amazing to me that these parts that would otherwise have been thrown in the trash could be changed into just this amazing meal.
So one way I like to prepare the tuna tail is this technique, which I kind of borrowed from the Filipino culture. What we do here is we take the tail with just like a finger's worth of oil, and I'll get it up to around 350, and I'll fry the tail. And I'll fry it on one side, and I rotate it all the way around until you can watch it cook and you see that the skin's fried crispy and that the meat is cooking on the way up into the bone. And then I'm gonna finish it in the oven, and I'll probably do it for around 400 degrees for another 15 minutes or so. All we're trying to do is get the heat all the way to the center of that bone so it's cooked all the way through and it'll just fall apart. So that way you get absolutely the maximum yield out of the tail. So this method gets the super crispy, crunchy skin, gets big succulent chunks of meat, and it has the bone and the marrow that's melted into the flesh. It's incredible.
So for this recipe, I used the spoon meat out of tail and also bloodline by gently scraping that usable meat off of the bone. I then sauteed that in olive oil with a number of seasonings that you would typically use for chorizo. Guajillo, ancho chilies, paprika, cumin, coriander, garlic, onion, and some salt. When you put that in the saute pan and you're kind of charring that up, you are then going to deglaze that with apple cider vinegar, and it almost turns into like a little bit of a gravy, which you want. You want that sauciness on that meat. It really cooks up like your favorite taco meat, whether you're using ground beef or using pork. So now you can put that chorizo mixture on anything. It could go on your chilaquiles, it could go on your nachos, it could go on a tostada or just a taco.
I love flavoring fish with different parts of itself. And that could be anything from tuna sushi flavored with the eyeball juice glaze, tuna steak in tuna broth. It could be sashimi in a fish sperm mousse, or it could be different layers of all of that. So you've kind of got this animal, you take it apart, and you mess with every little part to make it as amazing as possible, and then you put it back together again, and it just kind of causes these fireworks of flavor, but it all ties together because it's all its own flavor.
We're so caught up with organic and farm to table and where does our stuff come from? Well, this is a missing component that we need to plug in. We're gonna find ways to use offcuts and to feed more people with the same amount of fish, but knowing where it comes from, this is what we need to do in order to just make a step in the right direction.